Welcome to this explainer. Whenever we picture the Roman Colosseum, our minds usually jump right to those chaotic, free-for-all bloodbaths from Hollywood blockbusters. You know exactly what I'm talking about, where every fighter just grabs whatever weapon is lying around and dives headfirst into the fray. Well, today, we're going to completely dismantle that myth. Because what we're actually looking at when we dig into the historical evidence is a highly structured, constantly evolving science of combat. It was a calculated, heavily curated martial arts league, and we are going to rank the whole thing. Okay, let's dive right into a quote straight from our source material. Roman gladiator types were not a single, tidy, ancient taxonomy. Boom, that right there instantly shatters the illusion that the Colosseum was just some random grab bag of fighters, or even a neat, simple menu of character classes like you'd pick in a video game. The reality is much messier, a lot more layered, and honestly, infinitely more fascinating. Here's our agenda for today. 1. Beyond the Hollywood myth. 2. The verified arena heavyweights. 3. The matchmaking combat logic. 4. Fringe, weird, and unverified. And finally, 5. The true arena spectacle. Let's get into it. Section 1. Beyond the Hollywood myth. Establishing the historical tiers of evidence. Before we can even begin to rank these ancient fighters, we have to establish exactly how historians know who actually stepped onto that arena sand. We aren't just guessing here. The methodology is rigorous, and it's all about historical tiers of evidence. See, what we casually refer to today as gladiators was actually a very complex, kind of messy mix of 4 distinct layers. First, you had the formal armatry. Those are your highly defined classes based on specific weapons and armor. Then you had archaic, ethnic impersonations, which were literally fighters dressed up as conquered enemies. Next up, specialist arena roles like animal hunters or comic acts. And finally, rare, unverified labels that might have just been one-off gimmicks. It was all of these elements blending together to create the spectacle we know today. Now, the methodology here is what's really fascinating. To be absolutely confident a gladiator class actually existed as a standard fighter, historians need a convergence of 3 specific things. First, we need epigraphic evidence, like tombstones and inscriptions to give us their actual names. Then, we need visual evidence, from reliefs, mosaics, even little oil lamps, to prove what their equipment and armor actually looked like. And lastly, we need literary evidence to understand the symbolic logic of who they fought. When all 3 of those align, we have a verified heavyweight. And, this system didn't just pop up overnight. It completely evolved over time. Back in the early days of the Republic, the arena was largely about staging archaic ethnic identities. They were literally forcing fighters to dress up as Rome's defeated enemies, like the Samnites or the Gauls, basically as this politically incorrect display of dominance. But by the early empire, things shifted. Those conquered enemies were assimilated, so the arena transitioned into celebrating highly technical, abstract martial arts. By the time we hit the Flavian dynasty, this highly formalized canonical classification of fighters was totally complete. All right, Section 2, the verified arena heavyweights, the high-confidence core roster. Let's move on to the absolute verified icons of the arena and see how this builds our understanding. This is our high-confidence core roster. The guys where our epigraphic, visual, and literary evidence perfectly align. There is zero doubt these guys ruled the sands. First up, we have the murmillo. This guy was the quintessential Romanized heavy fighter. Picture a walking fortress. The murmillo relied heavily on crouching protection, advancing like an absolute tank behind a massive rectangular shield called a scutum. They wore this distinctive helmet featuring a graded visor and fish imagery. Their entire fighting style? It was all about methodical defense, just waiting for the opponent to make one tiny mistake and then brutally punishing those close openings with their gladius, the classic Roman short sword. Now, in stark contrast to that, we have the thraex. This was a class directly descended from Thracian ethnic fighters. Instead of hiding behind a massive wall of a shield, the thraex utilized high mobility and carried a much smaller shield called a parma. But the thing you'd really notice is the sica, this incredibly vicious curved blade. That weapon was specifically designed to reach directly over or around an opponent's heavy rectangular defenses. They were aggressive angle attackers, constantly moving, probing, trying to find that one weak point in the armor. Then we get to the retiarius, who was just a radical anomaly in the arena. They fought almost entirely half naked. No helmet, no shield, barely any armor at all. Their entire survival depended on sheer mobility and distance control. Armed with a weighted net, a trident, and a dagger, their whole goal was to disrupt an opponent's balance, entangle them from afar, and absolutely avoid getting into close clinch range at all costs. To the Roman audience, this exposed marine-themed fighter was both visually and morally fascinating because they totally lacked that traditional soldierly stoicism.
And of course, the retiarius needed a very specific counter, which brings us to the secutor. The name literally translates to the pursuer. The secutor was your heavy pressure fighter. But what is absolutely amazing here is the specific engineering of their armor. They wore this bizarre, perfectly smooth egg-like helmet with just tiny little holes for the eyes. Why? So that the retiarius's net would slide right off them. Seriously, no crests, no ridges, nothing for the net to catch on. Their one job was to constantly pursue the evasive net fighter, closing the distance while staying fully protected.
Which leads us to Section 3, the matchmaking combat logic, the science of legible asymmetry. This brings up a really crucial question. Why did Rome specifically design these fighters to look and fight so drastically differently from one another? Well, the answer lies in their deeply calculated matchmaking logic. You see, Roman matchmakers almost never did mirror matches. Pitting two heavily armored guys with giant shields against each other, it's boring. It just turns into a slow pushing match. Instead, they engineered what we call legible asymmetry. They were constantly testing these fundamental martial questions. Take the classic pairing, the murmillo versus the thraex, or sometimes the hoplomachus. This was the ultimate test. The large, heavy shield with linear advancement going up against the small shield, high mobility, and curved or spear attacks. It gave the crowd this incredibly clear, visually striking contrast in tactics. And this brilliantly illustrates our next great pairing, the retiarius versus the secutor. This right here is the ultimate matchup of coverage versus mobility. You are pitting the marine-themed reach and entanglement of the net fighter against the grounded, heavily armored pressure of the pursuer. The crowd in the stands could instantly read the dynamics of the fight. If the retiarius keeps his distance, he wins. If the secutor closes the gap, he wins. It was purely engineered theatrical genius. All right, on to Section 4. Fringe, weird, and unverified, the medium and low confidence tiers. Now we're gonna leave the rock-solid history behind and step into the shadowy fringes of the arena. This is where the evidence gets incredibly thin, the artifacts dry up, and honestly, things get really weird. Because, look, when you watch movies or play games about Rome, you almost always see these exotic, almost fantastical classes. You see warriors riding around in chariots, guys dual-wielding swords, or fighters swinging lassos. They absolutely dominate pop culture. But we have to ask ourselves, how much historical reality is actually backing them up? Let's look at what we'd call the medium confidence tier. We have the Isidorius, which has semantic ties to British chariots. We have the Democritus, a dual sword fighter. And we have the Petronius, who seems to have been a comic or mock combat performer used mostly for halftime entertainment. Now, the issue here is that while we do have their names on inscriptions, the visual evidence is incredibly sparse. We know they existed, sure, but their exact armor, who they standardly fought, and their formal combat roles, those are mostly inferred by historians, not explicitly proven by that rock-solid convergence of evidence we talked about earlier. Then we hit the low confidence tier, which frankly is practically historical guesswork. Take the Loquarius, supposedly a lasso thrower. We only know about this from a very late lexical mention, way after the arena's prime. Or the scissor, which is heavily reconstructed from incredibly thin evidence to have this crescent-bladed forearm tube. And we have to be so careful here. The Andabata, often reconstructed today as a fighter who fought completely blindfolded, might literally just stem from a passing sarcastic joke made by the Roman politician Cicero. No joke, it may have never been a real canonical class at all. So the crucial point here is this. We absolutely cannot let modern imagination overwrite historical gaps. Our source text strongly warns against filling in obscure labels with modern reenactment intuition. Historians just cannot treat rare, localized anomalies or one-off entertainment gimmicks as standardized empire-wide gladiator classes on the exact same level as a murmillo or a retiarius. Which brings us to Section 5, the true arena spectacle, synthesis and historical memory. Let's bring all this evidence together. By throwing out the Hollywood myths and strictly honoring those evidence tiers, we can finally synthesize what the Roman gladiatorial system actually looked like on a grand scale. The most defensible final schema looks something like this. Instead of a simple, flat menu card of fighters to choose from, the arena was a living, breathing ecosystem. Right at the center, you had a stable core of those highly verified imperial classes. Orbiting them was a fading layer of archaic ethnic predecessors. Surrounding that was a ring of rare, highly technical specialists that might pop up occasionally. And adjacent to the whole thing was an entirely separate sphere of animal fighters, the venatores, and comic relief performers. The true genius of the arena wasn't chaotic violence, it was curation. Roman matchmakers were not designing realistic battlefield simulations, as we've seen. They were meticulously designing legible asymmetry and spectacular contrast. It was this highly calculated theatrical display of Rome's martial philosophy, literally turning the concepts of defense, mobility, and weaponry into an organized visual drama for the masses. And that leaves us with a truly fascinating realization. If some of the most famous pop culture aspects of the gladiatorial arena, like blindfolded fighters or lasso wielders, are actually built on very shaky historical guesswork or even ancient political jokes, it begs a much larger question. What other facts of the ancient world have we simply accepted that are shaped purely by the gaps in our evidence? How much of history is just a myth built to fill the silence of the archives? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see a gladiator on screen. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you know.
All is